Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second of two webinars in the NASEO Energy Security Foundational Data Education webinar series. I'm Campbell Delahoyd with NASEO. I'm our Senior Program Director for Energy Security, and I'll be moderating this session today. Today, we're going to look at data as a tool and asset for state energy office security programs. Also, please forgive me as I look away every once in a while and let new people into the room. But today we have a great slate of state energy office speakers. I will be co-moderating with Megan Levy, our host and colleague from the Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. And we'll get to the speakers here in just a minute to introduce themselves. But quick, wanted to give a little bit of background on the purpose of this webinar, what we're doing, and where we're going with it. Ultimately, this webinar is really reconnecting with the roots of the NASEO Energy Security Committee, which actually used to be the NASEO Energy Data Committee, so I've been told. This actually preceded my time here at NASEO. But we've heard so many good things about, got a hot mic. Oh, I think it's you. All right. But we've heard so many good things about data and how it's really the foundation of long-standing energy security programs and informed energy security investments and emergency response that we wanted to use today as both a refresher for some of the seasoned folks that are with us today, and also to an extent, an introduction to really nitty-gritty foundational data for some of the newer folks with energy offices or within the energy security programs of the offices. So ultimately, we're going to answer, why does this data matter? How can data help you in your jobs, both in energy emergency response and investment? So that's what we're going to hone in on today. So I'm going to turn it to our panelists to go through and introduce themselves. And then we're going to go into some sort of general warm-up questions that we'll field to all the panelists. And then we have some one-on-one discussion and Q&A with each of our panelists today that we'll be walking through. There will be some opportunity for questions at the end, but also please feel free to drop some questions into the chat if you have them. And I'll direct our wonderful speakers to answer them once they can actually take a breath. But without any further ado, we'll start with speaker introductions. So with the order that we have on the agenda, I'll turn it over to the man by the sea.
Is that me?
That's you.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. Edward O'Brien, senior economist here in Louisiana in the Office of Energy, housed in the Department of Energy and Natural Resources. I'm still getting used to that. It's been almost a year, and yeah, no. And I work a lot with data in my job. Back to you, Campbell.
Fantastic. Thanks. All right, we'll turn it over to our colleagues at NYSERDA.
Good afternoon. This is Matt Milford. I'm a project manager of the Energy Resilience and Emergency Preparedness team at NYSERDA, just the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Been with NYSERDA for 15 years and primarily support the state's ESF 12 response for liquid fuels coordination and their state strategic fuel reserve and our energy security planning. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Joe.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Excuse my voice. I caught one of my daughters on colds from school. So my name's Joe Osso. I'm a senior analyst for the energy markets team here at NYSERDA. And I've been with NYSERDA just about 6 years. Before that, I was in environmental consulting for over 12 and a half years. Quickly became known as the data guy over there. And it's propelled me here with all the markets watching and all the lines of information and data that we're tracking here at NYSERDA. So that's everything for me, and I'll pass it on.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And then we'll turn it to Carrie.
Hi there, Carrie Heinrich. I'm in the Energy Security Office in Wisconsin under the Public Service Commission. I've been the energy security lead for Wisconsin for a couple of years now. And, prior to that, also similar to Joe, I worked in consulting for about 22 years in energy efficiency and renewable energy, and also loved working on data there. But the thing that keeps me up at night is, do I have enough data to provide situational awareness and effective response for fuel supply issues? Yeah, thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Campbell.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And then last but certainly not least, Megan.
Yeah, I'll help co-moderate this rowdy group, particularly the Man by the Sea. I'm Megan Levy, formerly of Wisconsin State Energy Office, and can't be happier about Carrie picking up the mantle and doing great work there. But from my now federal perch, data is so incredibly important, and the 2 daily reports that I get on infrastructure, on energy emergencies, including a weekly liquid fuels report, are really, really important, not just for me, but for the whole department, and how we respond as federal ESF 12, how we try to anticipate things. So that question, why does data matter? It seems very simplistic, but it's so important, because we have to have data-driven decision making, or else we really can't justify what we're doing. However, data we don't always have enough, per Carrie's comments. So how do we work with what we have to make the best decisions? I think is definitely something we're going to get to and talk about during this webinar. So I'm excited about it. We've got a great panel, and thanks to all you states for coming out. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Megan. And before we really dive into it, we did send out a read-along document a few minutes prior to this kicking off. We being the panelists and NASEO staff pulled this together based on some of the terms and resources that we'll be walking through today. So please feel free to reference that at any point. I think some of our panelists will as well, but everything should be consolidated there. So without any further ado, we're going to jump into some of the more general and generic questions. And don't worry, everybody, we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty, detailed and more exciting bits shortly. Don't worry. So first off, for the panel, what is energy security data, and what do we mean when we say that? I know everybody has different programs, different size offices, different things you're looking at, and apparently a lack of adequate data. So what does it mean? Feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll kick us off. So in brainstorming with Matt and all of the other panelists, I kind of came up with a broad definition with all of the input. I think energy security data is a lot of things. It's a culmination of markets data, infrastructure data, and general current events information and data for a lot of things to evaluate a lot of different perspectives. It establishes multiple lines of evidence that we as the experts generate defensible conclusions from. Weather data, nice one. I saw that pop up.
Well, and not to be too obvious, but what about economic data too? Sorry, go ahead.
Before we get to economic data, just building off Joe what said, right? I mean, we're not only looking at EIA statistics, right? We're looking at our critical infrastructure in our state. We're looking at market conditions. Sometimes that's local, regional, national, or even worldwide. And we'll talk about some examples about that. But it's also about how we use the data. And we're going to get into more details throughout this webinar. But I wanted to start with just setting the table by saying that it's not just about having the statistic, but we want to analyze that piece of data and then evaluate that data. So what do I mean by analyze and evaluate? Well, one example that I'm going to give you is just looking at your regional inventories, right? Basic EIA statistic. Could be distillate inventories, gasoline inventories. We'll just take that. So we have that piece of data, right? But what does that mean? Well, first, let's analyze it from a seasonal perspective, right? We all know gasoline demand tends to be higher in the summertime. And if you're in the northern half of the country, Distillate fuel tends to be higher in the winter time because you have both on-road diesel and heating oil. So you look at it from a seasonal perspective. You also compare it against prior years, right? What happened last year? What happened over the last 3 years or 5 years, right? And you get to set that benchmark. Then you want to evaluate it, right? What does that statistic look like compared to those benchmarks? And what does that ultimately mean, right? If you're 5% below a 5-year average, what does that mean compared to 10% below a 5-year average? How are you comparing it over the last 10 years? Are you at minimum levels or are you at record highs? So there's a lot of different ways to look at data, but I always start with taking a piece of a statistic and then analyzing and then evaluating that data.
Gosh, that was a great point. And you brought up trends already, which is just such a thing that I'm obsessed with. Because DOE put out some guidance in 2022 for state energy profiles that really just said, hey, put in a year's worth of data and don't worry about it. And I kind of freaked out when I came to DOE and actually read the guidance they put out. Whoops, my bad. But realizing that, you know, in Wisconsin, we've been tracking energy use since the 1970s for a reason, because we didn't trust EIA, but also they were, you know, a little bit all over the place. But what is that trend? You know, and thinking about, I think we just had this conversation, I think David Terry brought it up when we were talking about the Northeast and like, what does 5 years look like? Because Caesar was reporting out on this 5-year average and we're like, wait a minute, it's 2024. So you're going back to 2019 and you're looking at a 5-year average. Boy, is that thing going to be skewed by the pandemic, by Russian aggression in Ukraine, by, you know, just countless, you know, the ban on using Russian petroleum. So not only setting those, you know, kind of that benchmark, as you said, but then really understanding what happened. Like in Wisconsin, I always say, boy, we gotta look back at least 10, maybe 15 years now, because we had that really bad polar vortex in 2014. It doesn't really get captured again by the 2019 or 20. Did we have a 2022? We had a couple, but they were just like baby polar vortices. Anyway, but really great point on like, you can set a benchmark, but it shouldn't be arbitrary. You should kind of try to look holistically at the data.
Totally agree. If you don't mind me jumping in here, I know I'm in. For me, it'll even go back further than that. That I'll go back to some of the pre-Katrina data to look at oil production, oil consumption. Now, production in Louisiana has dropped considerably since then. Part of it was due to Katrina, yes. But what are the trends in, let's say, times of a hurricane? How much can we expect percentage-wise to drop off? I look for trends like that. And it's important to understand what the trends are telling someone in there. Now, what we're seeing nationally is lower consumption overall compared to 20 years ago. And, you know, we're at the same time, we have the most production, at least on oil products, in US history, at least unrefined oil ever in US history right now. You know, I'm not saying correlation and causation, but you know, what's going on here? Let's talk about why things are going on. Let's talk about why it's important to talk about it. Let's talk, you know, you got this happening. What's going to happen here? Okay, so the hurricane's coming into Louisiana. Louisiana has 15% of all the refineries within the US. How is that going to affect the US overall? So it's important to think about all of that data. Price of gasoline is going to go up. I'll just, you know, I'll give you the answer there. I'm not going to keep you in suspense. But it's important to think about what happens on a regional level, how it might affect the national level as well. So I will kick it back to the next person who wants to speak, whether that be.
I'll just pop in to say everyone's saying the same thing. Context. You need the context. Data is great, but you have to have all of the you know, surrounding impacts or indices to help support your answer. So.
Well, and that's why census data can be energy security data too. And that's why we comb over the American Community Survey, right? Because it's the only place that really tells us even an estimate of like who uses wood to heat their home, who uses these other weird products. Kerosene use is really hard to track in the Northeast, right? So, it's sort of, sometimes it's an unexpected data point, but we have to, which we wouldn't necessarily categorize as this is energy security data, but it's to provide that context. It's so important.
And I think that's a
And
perfect
to build
segue. Oh, go ahead,
Well,
Matt.
I was going to build off one more point. To build off that, just talking about, it's also the relationship between data, right? So you could be seeing an environment where you have low inventories, but there might be an economic reason for that, right? So if you're seeing a market that's generally backwardated, that's not incentivizing inventories. I'm throwing out a big term, backwardated. I don't know if it made the list, but basically looking at prices now that are higher than future prices, which is a disincentive to buy and hold fuel. It's usually a situation in which the market is typically short on supply, and so you're seeing more just-in-time and less inventory build. So understanding the overall context, like my other colleagues were saying, right? So understanding that relationship, look for those price signals, right? So it's not just about inventories, but the market signals. It could be looking at spot versus future prices. It could be looking at retail against wholesale prices. There's a number of different ways to look at pricing data that will help you analyze kind of what's going on in the market. But there's a relationship for sure between price and inventories.
That's great, Matt. And thanks, Megan, for dropping the definition into the chat. We'll update the list, and maybe we'll just keep a running master list of terms and what it means for state energy offices. So before we go on to the individual Q&A, I did want to pose the second question that we have here for the group. And we were hinting at it slightly, but how is energy security data different than any other type of data? Matt, you mentioned pricing. We've talked about stocks and inventories. I think some economic indicators were brought up, the census. That's all well and good, but you all mentioned context, you all mentioned that context matters. So I'd love to hear from each of you as to what makes a specific piece of data relevant to energy security and health and safety or economic security.
I can kick us off again, and it's a pretty quick answer from me anyway. I don't think there is actually a difference between energy security data and regular energy statistics. If there's an event or a situation that we need to evaluate, they're all pieces of the same puzzle. It's all just building that perspective that we're evaluating and trying to make those defensible conclusions from. And it could be from so many different sources. We're bombarded every day with something new or something that kind of surprised us. It's kind of the adventure of this job. It's shocking how many things influence supply chains, markets, everything. So I think it's all the same puzzle. It's just different pieces that we got to fit together and draw those stories from.
Yeah, so knowing those pieces of the puzzle, right, is really about understanding your own state's energy profile and your state's energy supply system, right? So knowing where the liquid fuels are coming in the state, how are they coming to the state, what are your critical pipelines, waterways, railways, et cetera. Is your state importing or exporting electricity? So it's not just all liquid fuels, I promise. But yeah, knowing that key energy profile and the supply chain for fuels in your state is going to be key to understanding what matters as an energy security statistic versus kind of a nice to need to know. But like to Joe and to Megan's point, right, anything can be an energy security statistic for the census data, right? Knowing how many homes are used on heating oil can be key to understanding how much demand we might have in the wintertime. Knowing that there's X% fewer homes that are heating with heating oil now compared to 5 or 10 years ago also tells us something about the market. So those are some of the things that we look at.
And those are all inferences that we get from the data that, you know, and it affects Megan's trend lines there because she likes them so much with the data. So, you know, it's important to understand what your state and your region essentially, how it uses the various energy products out there. I'm talking, you know, electricity, oil and gas, kerosene, diesel, jet fuel, however you want to go about it. And I would venture to guess that anyone who's involved with energy security here has a pretty good reading on how their state, you know, what their state's doing with that information. You know, they know what's going on with the consumption on the consumption side, the consumption of liquid products, on the consumption of the demand for electricity. So, you know, those are very important things, especially when in weather events, you know, what the difference is between summer and winter. I think either Joe or Matt mentioned that earlier. I forgot who, I'm sorry. Um, um, you know, it's these things will change. These things will have an effect that, you know, a state like Louisiana, if it gets below 40, everyone's wearing Uggs and earmuffs. Which is shocking to me still, even though I've been down in the South for 20 plus years. But you know, or even below 60, they're wearing that. So it's just the tolerance for or what how different regions define cold, and the tolerance for that cold is different, and you're going to have different heating experiences from that. And what does it have to do with energy security? Everyone wants to be warm on a cold day. Everybody wants to be comfortable in their own house. Um, Energy security has a lot to do with that, not just on the energy itself side, but the efficiency side as well. And that's something that we probably should touch on more, but it's probably more suited for a different topic. And I'm gonna be quiet.
I think that was great, and I was breaking really quick and then turn it to Carrie because all I was going to say is the only difference is how you act on it, right? So if I'm in DC or Louisiana and it's below 50 and I put on my North Face puffer jacket as one does, I might not put that on until it's below 20 here in Wisconsin so that people don't make fun of me. But it's also context. It's also, it gets real cold here. So how do we use that data? The only time when the amount of time truckers spend in line is a data point that matters is in energy security data, right? Like, it doesn't normally make it into our SEDS profile. So we do go out and we get those firsthand accounts from folks, and we synthesize a little different data, and it's sometimes there's a little bit of you got to sprinkle a little fairy dust on there too, because it's not all just a straight up game. And Carrie knows a little bit about that. Like, there's one guy who's always like, "Can you please get me a waiver?" And you're like, "Okay, I need to talk to 5 other people to make sure you're not just the guy who talks a lot." But go ahead, Carrie.
And to bring it home, someone said you should know all of the things about your state. And as a new energy security practitioner, I didn't know all the things until I started to get in there. And so don't be afraid if you aren't aware of everything. We rely on each other, and that's why you're here too, to help support each other and do the best we can together, because we can't keep track of everything.
That's a great
That's
point.
for sure. Great comment from Paul Holloway in the chat too about a little more context around backwardation rather. I like to add an ization, because there is a danger to it and something to watch. Sorry.
Oh no, all good. All right. We're going to move into the individual Q&A. I think we have a couple deliberate plugs for some of the other panelists to jump in here, but Ed, you're first on deck. So looking at data from a macro level and bringing it back down into context, can you tell us a little bit about global markets and what they mean for Louisiana? I have a couple question part A and B here for you as well.
Okay, well,
We don't.
I was
Go.
just going to start with global markets, and then you can ask me the questions.
Fair enough.
Okay, so global markets don't just affect Louisiana; they affect the all across the nation, especially on the price of oil. Now, it's not just global; it's also regional. That there are regional differences, such as let's say Louisiana Light Sweet, West Texas Intermediate. And if you click on the link to the oilmonster.com crude oil prices, you can see all the various prices throughout the United States and various blends throughout the United States within yeah, that are being sold. So I want to say there's definitely over 50. I've never really sat down and counted them all, but there's definitely over 50 different types of blends being sold throughout the United States. But the U.S. benchmark is typically WTI, with, I'm going to say, Louisiana Light Sweet being the second most important, because yeah, it is. And then on the global scale, we all have the Brent benchmark, which is named after the oil extracted from the North Sea, which tends to run about higher than the WTI, but it usually runs about $3 to $6 higher, depending on global factors. Now, if you look at that web page on Oil Monster, you're going to see different types of oil. You're going to see a light, you're going to see a heavy, you're going to see a sour, you're going to see a sweet. Thank you, Campbell. Now, this is getting into the minutia of it, and some of you might not be interested, but I find it fascinating because I've been in this business for 20 plus years now. So oil is light and heavy describes the I'm going to say the viscosity oil. That's not quite true. I'm going to get to the truth of it matter, but it describes pretty much the viscosity of oil, where light is less viscous and it has a higher gravity number, above 30 on a 0 to 60 scale, whereas heavy tends to be more viscous. Think about like tar, and has a lower gravity, under 30. But the heavy and the light actually refers to the hydrogen chains within the oil. That a heavier oil lacks the hydrogen, as much hydrogen in the oil as the lighter oil. So lighter, hydrogen's light, it's the lightest atom. So hydrogen's light, lighter oil. Without it, it gets heavier, heavy oil. Now, generally, the lighter the oil, the more expensive it is, because it's easier to refine. But in the 90s, some refineries changed what the composition of oil is blended in there and consumed. So to utilize a mixture of the cheaper, heavier oil, and that used to be imported from Venezuela, because it was in the Orinoco there, because it was really cheap. But since Chavez and now Maduro is taken over there, it's become less plentiful, and we're relying on a lot of the heavier oil from the tar sands of Alberta now to utilize that. And the sweet and the sour, getting back to that describes the oil's sulfur content, where the sweet has the lower sulfur and the sour has the higher sulfur. So I probably went way in depth to what you were looking for, Campbell, but that's a pretty good overview of the different types of oil, and in the regionally and in the U.S. and I touched around the global network. So
No, that's
there you go.
great. Thanks.
Okay.
And I think there were a couple areas there where I myself have some questions too, but I'm wondering if you can just highlight which sources in particular are your go-tos. What are you looking at in terms of thresholds? At what point does any fluctuation in what you're monitoring cause a red flag for you? And what does that mean in terms of prices or supply?
Okay, I look at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange for some of the future pricing there. I looked at Bloomberg. Bloomberg I actually always have up on my computer just because while it is it's not the Bloomberg terminal, we can't afford that. But it's a good 20-minute delayed, view of what's going on right now. And it has the WTI Brent and it has natural gas on there as well. So it gives you a good picture of what's going on currently and if there's any large swings going on during the day or anything. What else? I look at that oil monster probably once a week. Just because I think data's cool and there's a lot of different data on there for prices. EIA, for a good overview of what's going on for the previous month, previous couple of months, that's a good way to get the information, prices, production. And it's good since it has not just your state, my state being Louisiana, but it also has the US information and to a lesser extent some of the global information. More on the pricing for global, they have the OPEC information, OPEC prices, OPEC press prices, non-OPEC or all import prices on there. So it's a good way to easily access that information. And we do a Energy Facts annual that compiles a lot of that information. It compiles 40 different things that I look at within Louisiana, well, not just within Louisiana, but for the state and throughout the country and the world. And that's the other link that I sent you, Campbell, if you want to post that, there you go. And that's the most recent one for 2023. It recaps 2023. Again, there's 40 different tables within it. A lot of good information in there. And we try to give that to our legislators so they can make better decisions based on the information. But anyone can use it. Feel free to ask any questions about that. We do use EIA, but we have a great database here with Louisiana specific information on there that I grab. And I think that's how I'm gonna leave that one off. But one thing I'd be remiss about saying, and it's something that I know I bring up a lot on the various calls, I bring up the crack spread. Now, the crack spread is the difference in price between a barrel of crude oil and the refined products made from it. I know some of you people think I'm making a joke of this, and maybe I am, but it's really important. For me, I feel that it's really important to talk about and to at least look at, because it shows you how profitable a refinery is. So if you see the crack spread being wide, which sounds terrible in this context, but if you see the crack spread being wide, the refiners are making a lot of money, which tends to mean that it's going to be gasoline is going to end up being more expensive. When you see it having be a narrow spread, you're going to have a lower price of gasoline. And I know my time's starting to run low here, so I'll leave you with this one rule of thumb that I do to figure out how much a gallon of gasoline should be. For every dollar a barrel, it's about 4 cents at the pump. So for $25 a barrel, it should be about $1 at the pump. For $50, it should be about $2. For $75, it should be about $3. I checked it right before we came on, I think we're about $70 per barrel, a little bit less, and that's about $2.80. I saw it down here for $2.30 a gallon. So rule of thumb, it doesn't hold true all the time, but rule of thumb I use is 4 cents per dollar per barrel. So
that's really interesting. And I think I like that old saying when it comes to petroleum prices too, like up like a rocket, down like a feather, right? Like
yeah,
they can get stuck up there, it turns out. That was really helpful, Ed, and I always I like to delve into why the crack spread actually matters, and it's not just a fun thing to say. But can you talk a little bit about OPEC and OPEC Plus, and do they matter as much to us today with record production in, the U.S.?
That,
What's your
that
take on that?
that's a really good question. In the 1970s, they mattered a lot more, and even up into the 80s. Right now, we're more of a regional. I want to say that the U.S. gets about 200,000 barrels per day from Saudi Arabia, and maybe a couple of 100,000 more from the other OPEC nations. But we're producing roughly 13.4 million barrels a day in the U.S. A lot of that coming out of Texas. Hi, Eddie. And most of the rest of it's coming from Canada or Mexico. So is it as important as it used to be? Just in setting the prices, setting the international prices. But that's also one of the reasons why the WTI tends to be lower than the Brent on the global markets too. And we don't have to pay for shipping or as much transport. There's little things like that. So,
But we still import a little,
we
1
do.
or 2% because our refiners are tooled to produce it, because it's part of this like global shell game that we do with this important commodity.
Right. But again, I want to say, I think we're using right around 19 million barrels per day, give or take, depending on the season as well. We're producing 13.4. Some of that is being exported. I want to say we're importing, and I didn't look at this. This is my bad. I want to say it's about 6 million barrels from Canada a day and another 2 million from Mexico. And we're exporting, I want to say 4 million a day, give it 2.84, something like that. So we are still exporting. But we're importing still. So you're right. It's a type of a global shell game.
Yeah, in 2024, we imported about 4.3 million barrels a day from Canada, according to the
Okay,
EIA.
and it's 6 million total, right?
We're up here in
I
Wisconsin. We're just living on Canadian crude. We're just drinking it. You know what I mean? But I won't take us off. Very interesting, and economics really matter. So I appreciate you setting the stage. Campbell, I'll stop derailing this.
No, that's great. It wouldn't be a NASEO Energy Security Committee call if we weren't behind on time. So Ed, thanks for that. Great overview of all the different sources that you look at and others look at and maybe should look at. So we dropped some of the links that Ed talked about in the chat here. It's also in the read-along materials document. So we'll pivot now over to our friends at NYSERDA, Matt and Joe. So I'll preface this by saying NYSERDA is, one of the largest state energy offices. That's pretty obvious here. So we know that your data analysis and collecting capabilities are quite significant. So even though there's a large disparity in size between NYSERDA and many other energy offices, I'm wondering if you can provide a basic overview of your data collection and analysis capabilities, what sources you use, whether they're public or private, the various shops that are within NYSERDA that you collaborate with, and anything else program-wise that might be worth highlighting for others looking to take away some best practices. Maybe not at scale, but.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. We can definitely give you a good overview of NYSERDA's processes over here. So in the energy markets team, where my role resides, we've got about 7 people that help us with a lot of our market research. That ranges from all of our surveys. The shop survey is a big one, and it's a big effort because that's a lot of calls we have to make. Our NYSERDA-based FAST survey. That's the fuels availability. Sorry, everyone. Fuels availability and supply tracking survey, and it's completely separate from SHOP, but we reach out to industry stakeholders, retail companies, just to talk to them about if they're having problems getting fuel, if they're seeing any issues along the supply chain. It's been a very, very interesting couple of years with that survey, and the industry was very excited we were reaching out, but we need people to do that. So we've got myself, 2 project managers, 2 project coordinators, and an intern, along with a supplemental coordinator from one of our other teams in the policy and analysis team that helps with the calls. But then, like I said, that same team collects the data, and we've got an array of tools that have been built because there is so much data that we're looking at. Helps us maintain efficiency and consistency. And then, we've got our senior leaders on this team, one of which is Brad Leach, who is a market expert. He actually does have access to the Bloomberg terminal, our subscription at NYSERDA. But the team as a whole, we do have private subscriptions to things like S&P Global. So we get Gas Daily, we get online access to Point Logic, which is a natural gas tracking subscription. But again, a lot of private or a lot of public sources as well. Like we've already talked about, EIA is obviously a big one. And some of the other sources we're all looking at. But it's an array of data. We rely on a lot of other teams for collaboration, whether they're asking us for support and it propels us to refocus our research and help them out, or perhaps they're looking at stuff that we've already started scratching the surface on and we're helping them. Perhaps the performance management and reporting team is looking for new ways to evaluate something or to standardize something, so they'll come to us. Yeah, I'll I think I answered most of the big questions. So Matt, if you want to run with it from the emergency resilience and preparedness team.
Sure, just building on, so, Joe mentioned a lot of staff, a lot of resources here at NYSERDA. We also have a big mandate, right? New York's a big state. We have some significant clean energy goals in the state. And so there's a lot of work that goes with that helps support that mission. That's not, maybe that's not seen in some other states. So, natural gas monitoring, electricity price forecasting. So there's a lot of work that NYSERDA does that builds off of some of the energy security and the liquid fuels sector coordinating that we talk about here on the Energy Security Committee. So yes, NYSERDA is big. We have a lot of resources, but we also have a lot to cover on that. So I think that covers that first question if we want to keep moving down the list. But I did want to mention one thing earlier on the Ed talking about WTI, right? If you're on the East Coast, right, we are really tied into worldwide markets. Our prices are definitely looking closer at the Brent benchmark because the East Coast primarily imports a lot of products, right? And then we do have a lot of fuel that moves by pipeline, like Colonial, Plantation, et cetera, from Pad 3 to Pad 1. But we really are tied into worldwide markets, and we are really tied into that Brent benchmark. And I know, like for the Midwest, you guys are influenced by Canadian, coming from Western Canadian Select, right? That's that benchmark. And of course, when you're talking about California and other states on the West Coast, they're really tied into what's happening in the Pacific Basin. So the U.S. is very unique in the sense of, how diversified our energy supply is, how regional and influenced by all those factors that Ed was talking about earlier. I just wanted to get that in there. But Campbell, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joe. So next up, obviously you have a lot of different sources from which to gather this information. A lot of them is direct calling and information gathering. So we're hoping you can discuss how NYSERDA utilizes its relationships with providers and distributors to verify data and paint a more complete picture of the market. Anything you can provide on how those relationships were forged or maintained, either by you or colleagues that previously held your position.
Joe, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Sorry, Matt, I couldn't remember who was going to start this one. Sorry, my fault. So the relationships we have are built a lot of different ways. I mean, some of them are legacy. I mean, we have a big history in this team going back to long ways, and those are passed on. Obviously, the shop survey for the retailers starts to build relationships. I mentioned our other survey for the supply chain. We actually we did our own research and put together a list of retailers we identified off of web searches. And we had to keep it separate from shop because we couldn't bring those lists together. So we had to build it ourselves. And it came together. They were, like I said, some companies will talk our ears off. They will tell us everything on their mind, from the fuel question itself to they're having problems with their truck drivers, they're having problems with the insurance prices. Like, we get a very big picture just from making those calls. And like I said, those originated just from a web search, trying to get a good spread of representation across the state, because there are differences in New York between upstate and downstate. And those different perspectives are very important. And then we go all the way up the chains that Matt can probably expand on, but getting into some of the terminal managers, the pipeline managers. Now we're getting into like the regional contacts, NASEO, this group of individuals, all of our state neighbors. Like, there's just so many different places to start forging them. And once you have them, they really fly. And it really, I have presidents of retail companies that text me messages when they have a problem, or when they say, hey, we haven't talked in a while, I want to chat. And yeah, we'll talk about the Yankees a little bit, but we always come back to the markets and observations. And like I said, a lot of them really appreciate that we go that extra mile to talk to the people moving the fuel. So I think that's everything I've got. Matt, take it from there.
Yeah, so thanks, Chad. You covered a lot. So response is relationships, right? I mean, we can't really do emergency response without those relationships in the state, right? A lot of times, if we want real data, what's happening on the ground, we need to pick up the phone and call somebody. Those relationships have been built and supported over years, but it doesn't take a ton, right? I mean, you think, oh, New York, you got all this staff resources. It doesn't take a ton. Sometimes it's just having a regular scheduled phone call, right? For some of my contacts, we check in quarterly. For others, it may just be every once in a while. So we have an identified point of contact list, right, for our terminals, pipelines, and other major players in the industry. And, we make sure that we continue to forge those relationships, right? We make sure that we're updating those contact lists throughout the year. We're sending regular updates prior to the winter season and prior to the hurricane season. So we have a couple different checkpoints in the year to make sure that we're keeping up to date. And it's really just about, like Joe said, sometimes it's just casual conversation, but you're building that trust. So you're not just always seeking something from them when you talk to them, but you're building a partnership.
Yeah, and just one more real quick to build off of that. NYSERDA is a research arm for energy research and development. We don't really have the regulatory authority, so we rely on relationships with our other New York State agencies as well, like Department of Public Service, the regulatory arm for natural gas and electricity, contacts at the NASEO. Like, you'll find contacts everywhere that have a variety of experts, and just the emphasis that Matt and I are making is definitely don't be afraid to pick up the phone.
I know we're running short on time. I just want to mention our New York Fuels Regional Resilience Assessment Program, RRAP, working in conjunction with CISA on that project, but that helps us go to petroleum terminals across the state and make contacts with not only the regional managers for these companies, but also the on-the-ground terminal contacts. So it's, again, relationships. Thanks, Campbell, for bringing up my slide. And we can share this information afterwards because I know we're on time, but it helps us really understand, you know, the overall supply chain for their terminals, that we go to different terminals that build up different knowledge sources and capabilities about, you know, what terminal has backup power? What terminal would you go to if another terminal was down? Where are all your supply sources in the state? And then what are those critical interdependencies? So I know we're short in time. I want to move to the next question on DTN because I want to give Gary some time to talk from Wisconsin as well. So Cam, actually, if you bring up the NYSERDA slides again, I think I had a slide for the DTN. So DTN is a subscription service that NYSERDA utilizes for rack pricing and demand data. It has helped us, going the other way, it has helped us kind of replace the EIA 782C. I know that was a major question and concern. There, that's great. Yep. I'll do the DTN use example. So this, I'll talk about just a little bit about the subscription, right? Just in general, it is about $2,500 per month that NYSERDA pays for this service. But again, we're a bigger state. We have more rack cities that we're covering. So we're getting pricing data for 13 rack locations and demand data for 10 that is covering all, you know, liquid fuels that are provided at those racks. So it has it by, you know, not only looking at the rack in total, but down to the company level and the specific fuel type. So, you know, everything from, you know, your heating oil, your clear dyed diesel, all the different grades of gasoline, et cetera. We do a lot of consolidation of that data, right? Really looking at the city level. And one example I wanted to give was our use of this for the solar eclipse from earlier this year. We did an analysis of, you know, what did the gasoline volumes look like before, during, and after the solar eclipse? And having the DTN rack data allowed us to do that. And it really demonstrated that, you know, there was a real change in demand from the solar eclipse. And it helped us justify, right? So this, not only did we have this piece of data, but we used it in action, right? So we worked with our Department of Transportation. There was an hours of service waiver issued in relation to the solar eclipse because New York had such a large area of totality. So we're using this data in conjunction with, you know, real world events and making those kind of critical decisions. So do you want to cover DTN from the supply chain? And Cam will just back one slide.
Yeah, I can. Campbell, if you want to move to Carrie, we can. I mean, if people are interested in this, we can go into it in more detail. In summary, though, we've established some basic statistical tests to identify changes in the normal over the past 90 days. So that's what this is. I can go into more detail, but I want to open it up, Campbell, if you want to move on, so Carrie can have some time too.
Yeah, that's great and appreciate it. And apologies for the delay on this. For those of you attending, we will go over the hour slot that we have. You're welcome to stay, but this will also be recorded. So Carrie, we'll just dive right into your presentation. I'll pull that up if you think that's best. But we had a lot of questions for Carrie on some 782 C and A alternatives. As many of you know, those surveys have been suspended, and the data that's been going to state energy offices has been effectively cut off. So Carrie's been doing really a great job from the ground up, trying to replace some of those sources. And I'll turn it over to you, Carrie, for a little bit more insight on your experience so far.
Thank you. You can pull up the slide too, but you know, long story short, there's, you know, I still have a struggle with obtaining propane state level inventory data. Still haven't found an alternative that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. So I'll just spoiler alert there, but that doesn't, negate from the fact that there are other sources that you can use to help support a response effort if you need to. And so, I recognize, the plea is out there to, put in your comments for EIA. Those are due on the 20th. If you are in need of that data, because the data from 782C was key to establishing what the inventory was coming into the state, and it helped establish set aside levels during emergencies. So what would the state need to set aside at the supplier level to respond to a serious supply shortage? So, yeah, we can move forward. So, no direct economical alternative. NYSERDA is using that great platform, which I wish we could have gotten into a little bit more deeply, but there are some risk analyses data that you can use that's low cost or on the cheap. So we're going to get into all of these indices as we go through, so we can pop to the next one. So first, of course, is weather. Weather, dictates what type of supply is needed. You want to watch forward and backwards 10 days, basically. I encourage you to attend the winter or summer weather outlook webinars that are held twice a year. Those are critical to seeing, the seasonal impacts, and it also talks through, the supply levels as it relates to the season and what to expect for a long-term weather outage or weather situation. And then, so all the links that are in the deck are in the read along, so feel free to peruse them as we go. But, so because we're focusing on winter fuels too, and extreme cold and winter storms are always something we're watching for. So you're looking at weekly forecasts and what have you gone through in the last 10 days. So you can pop to the next one. This link, the decision support page, actually will point you to the actual or to situations that are being outlined in your National Weather Service local station may also offer weather briefings through your emergency manager or directly. So you might reach out to your emergency manager, your state level emergency management team, to see if they will help you with weather briefings. So expect that extreme cold for more than 10 days is going to lead to a tightness in the fuel market, period. It's, the supply chain will try to take care of that, but it's really a matter of, is there other extreme weather that's inhibiting the suppliers from actually getting product to end users? So, and then in terms of, rail and road beds, if you have thaws, it's going to be impossible to do a weight limit waiver, or very challenging on the road system. But so for Wisconsin, if 40% of our LP is coming in via rail, and the snow or sub-zero temperatures are preventing us from getting product through the rail, it's not really going to matter what we do or what we try to put in place from a rail perspective. But it's just a matter of monitoring it and seeing if you can get the product through over to haulers, and see if you can alleviate the situation through a hours of service or weight limit waiver. So watch the weather. Next slide. And we're at time, but so I'll just move forward with news and resources are extremely critical. So, you can't, like I said earlier, you can't monitor everything, but just keep your eyes and ears open. Watch out for monthly briefs from CSER. Sign up for CSER newsletters. Sign up for various news sources like Bloomberg. Set up Google alerts with your hot topics that you're expecting or that you want to watch within your own state. And then rely on your network. Let them follow what's happening from your network. Are they reporting that they're on allocation Are they reporting lines at the terminals? Those sorts of things. So, and then you hope you don't have to resort to this, but frequency of calls from your 211s, your call centers, those are going to be indicators of something that's more severe. And then, as others have mentioned, the shop calls, you can actually insert a question to your shop, during your shop calls to see if they're, without frightening them, to see if there's something that's happening within the market. Just check on so what's the market looking like for you? So. Network is always the best resource, although you will have to weigh it in with other data. Move to the next slide. Specific to Wisconsin or the Midwest, we monitor crop drying demand as well. So you can sign up for crop progress reports. They just put out the annual report for 2024. And you can see in the sort of violet far right line that we harvested early this year, and we actually harvested a very dry product this year. So we didn't need to even monitor that in any substantial way, but corn's dried at 16% moisture. It was harvested for the most part at 17%. So very simple year for us, but we have 553 million bushels of corn harvested this year or last year, and 532 million bushels this year. So huge demand or huge amount of product coming for the state. And, context is everything. So that's 100 million more bushels than our last major supply shortage in the 2020 or 2013, 2014 heating season, where everything is sort of an indicator of, or that's our benchmark for a very serious shortage. And so it's always a matter of, well, are we harvesting more, and and the moisture content in that year was between 25 and 30%. So, and it was harvested far later. So always watching against that benchmark. You can move to the next slide. And, a lot of folks watch Eagle Eye as it pertains to outages, but you can also check on oil refinery status through Eagle Eye. Just be mindful that for whatever reason, the capacity that's documented in Eagle Eye is really actually twice as much as what they actually, or what their actual capacity is. So just be aware of that. You can't sign up, can't register alerts, but you can definitely keep an eye by poking in there, say once a week. Okay, next slide. All right, and wholesale and retail prices, folks have mentioned, so that here's a slew of links, but they're mostly EIA driven. There are a couple of retail, diesel and gasoline price trackers, and then shop surveys for retail price at the state level. But Opus is Opus is the one thing that we do pay for, a subscription to daily spot and rack prices. And we watch based at the rack that brings in the most product for Wisconsin. So I can tell you that our subscription, covers the Conway, Bellevue, and Janesville racks, and the cost is about $5,000. So it's crude data. It's not analyzed, in any fancy way, but it is a lower cost way to get to data. All right, next slide. Inventory intel. So as most of you know, we can watch intel at the pad level. There is a lag on it, but it does give us some insight into seasonal inventories. And so back to all EIA level data, but it does help in some capacity, gives us a benchmark to go by. And then most states have the Department of Revenue tracks fuel consumption for gas and clear diesel. Jet fuel is a little bit more challenging so again, a bit of a gap, but it is one other way to manage to consumption data. I think that might be my last slide.
Yeah, it is.
but it just truly, speaks to there's a lot of data points and you can't watch it all necessarily all the time. It's really important to rely on, intel from all of your neighboring states. Make sure you're keeping in touch. If you're hearing something about something that's happening in other states, just reach out. And I do the same for, folks in our Midwestern uh, part of the country. So.
Yeah, and that's a great plug, Carrie. Thank you. And for everyone here, you can always reach out to anyone on the Energy Security Committee leadership team or NASEO, or as Carrie suggested, within your region, because they're going to know, they're going to have the best data and insight for what's actually happening within their state. So good call out. Let's see. Carrie, I did want to ask, let me stop sharing this one. I did want to ask at least one of these questions, and this touches on one of your final remarks, but obviously Wisconsin is a major importer of energy, and this will kind of segue into a follow-up question for everyone. But how do you track what amounts to almost $14 billion of imports? And what kind of vulnerabilities are created by this setup in both terms of monitoring and importing?
Mhm. Well, so as Ed mentioned earlier, um, and Joe, that, or maybe it was Matt, sorry, that a lot of Midwestern product is coming in from Canada, and so 50% of the petroleum product is coming through Canada, and a good chunk of it is coming through Wisconsin down into the Indiana, Illinois refineries, and then also over to Michigan and Ohio, and back into Canada through through Line 5. So it's always a matter of what is happening, north of us and around us in terms of product concerns and refinery maintenance outages. Those are always on in top of mind. But yes, Wisconsin only refines 10% of the product it uses, uh, everything else is coming from out of state. And then also we're a big service to, or we provide a large portion of the Midwestern crude oil through Enbridge lines. So always important to keep monitoring things as they're happening within our state, but also to make sure that others are reporting things throughout the Midwest. So, the um, contingency planning, it's really nice to be able to gather people when we need to. And it's really great to have a Midwestern sort of happy Midwesty attitude about sharing information across states. So.
I love it. I think that's something we can definitely foster and share here. So I do have one question for the panel generally, because it's pretty topical now, and we thank everybody for staying about 10 minutes over. So if you're here with us already, just bear with us for a bit longer, because this should be pretty interesting as well. But recently, there with the potential American tariffs on Canadian energy exports up to 25%. We're just wondering what you all are monitoring, hearing, and thinking, and perhaps even analyzing and forecasting with that potential threat and impact to the markets. So I'll turn it to the floor there, but would love to hear your thoughts on what that might mean, and in terms of data, what that might mean.
No, sir, I don't like it one bit.
Great.
That's my technical analysis.
Well, I can kick off and say that the discussion point is around revisiting the 2026 tariff or agreement between U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and with having said that 50% of the Midwestern's crude comes in from Canada, we obviously are keeping this as a very important topic, but at the same time, that's probably out of the state's hands. It's just a matter of managing and monitoring it and recognizing that we might need to discuss ways to get product elsewhere if push came to shove. But it really fosters the need to work together if a situation occurred.
Mhm.
Yeah, and for sure it's going to have an economic impact, right? I mean, we talked earlier about, 4.3 million barrels a day of crude coming in from Canada, about 2 million barrels a day coming in from Mexico. Right, that's going to make its way and affect prices for everyone. So certainly, it will disrupt supply chains, not only for crude, but other petroleum products. I think Paul Holloway mentioned earlier in the chat about the amount of refined products that the New England states get from the Canadian maritime provinces. Certainly that's an impact. So again, in terms of how does it affect your state, even if you can't control it from the state level, you can look at impact, and that really is going to be, again, know your supply chain, right? I mean, I think we saw from Ontario some statements about cutting off electricity exports to New York, right? And what would that mean to the state? And so it's not just all liquid fuels. We're seeing other potential impacts as well. There are some sources out there. There's EIA data series on company level imports, and while there's a lagged monthly data series, it does give you in your state specific products, the total volume of fuel that's coming into your state, where it's coming into your state, right? So those cross-border points, but that data can be analyzed for historical and seasonal trends.
And in Louisiana, one thing that I look at that I didn't mention before is with refineries, I actually get down to where the crude oil is coming from, whether it's domestic Louisiana, domestic US, Gulf of Mexico, or international. So we get down to that specificity here in the office.
And I think probably the biggest source I'm waiting to evaluate is the conversations that we have through our surveys. In past years, when the inventories were low, the retailers were always talking about how hard it is on them with the limited kerosene and the extreme price of kerosene from a couple of years ago. If the prices start increasing because of tariffs, I think the retailers are going to be reporting it. Kind of like Carrie said, those I don't know if it would be the informational calls rolling in, but those conversations, you'll start seeing the trends pick up on there's a looming problem growing. And like many have said, there may not be any direct action we can take, but I think there are routes where we'll get that information if the prices are going to become a problem. So that's the stuff I'll be watching.
Great. Well, we appreciate everybody's insight on that last question and time and then some today for the webinar. I will say for those still attending and for those that might be listening in later, we really only covered about a third of, I think, what we wanted to today, which is both unfortunate, but also a great indicator of really how deep we can go into some of these topics and where we will be going into some of these topics in the future. So one last plug for our standing NASEO Energy Security Committee and all hazards calls. Those are great forums for sharing information, such as potential interruptions or ongoing interruptions. And lastly, don't be afraid to reach out to NASEO or your colleagues here or other folks within the SLTT network. So with that, pending any final questions, I think we'll probably wrap for the day. I want to thank our panelists again. Sorry, the timeline didn't work out as initially planned, but that's just showbiz, I guess. So I'll pause here for any final questions or parting thoughts. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and we'll see some of you tomorrow. And if not, have a great holiday season. Take care.
You too, Campbell.
Thanks, Campbell.
Bye, all.